Okay, hey folks, I wanted to make a quick video about edges, just kind of partially a summary of what we talked about, partially a little bit of clarification, some things that I thought we didn't have enough time to get into that I wanted to. So I'm going to switch to my slides really quick and talk about like why edges get created. So, why is that not working? Oh well. So why do people form relationships from a network perspective? Why do edges get created in human social networks? There are some psychological explanations, which we'll talk about first. Homophily, which we talked a lot about, right? That people want to be similar to with similar others. So this is kind of a very simple network, right? Of three people who are B and C are the same along some dimension, right? They're both colored black. A is Purdue Gold. And so, according to homophily, B and C, right, are more likely to become connected to each other. So that's one psychological version, psychological explanation. And again, we talked about there's lots of different reasons for homophily. I'll talk about a few of those. But if we assume kind of the simple version of homophily, that people who are similar to each other will prefer to be in relationships with each other, all else being equal. A second is triadic closure or transitivity. These are two terms which I will use pretty much interchangeably. They're very similar. The idea is if A is friends with B and B is friends with C, then it's likely, for a whole host of reasons, that A will become friends with C. I guess, depending on, this is a directed network, so you could see the direction going both ways, that C would become friends with A and that A would become friends with C. Either of those are versions of triadic closure. Depending on what relationship we're looking at, either one or the other might be more likely. So so that's the idea. And again, there are psychological reasons for this. There's two versions of this. One is purely mathematical, that we find in networks, in human networks, almost anywhere you look, you will find triadic closure. That people who are where two people are friends and another two people, and this exact situation, right, where there's a triangle, A and B are friends and B and C are friends, then A and C, that link is made much more often than by chance, right? Than you would assume if people were connected randomly. It's very common for there to be. And what this leads to, it just means that there are groups, right? That there are groups in social networks, that there are clusters of people who most of them are friends with, have relationships with each other, compared to, and then they're not friends with people, much less likely to be friends outside of the group. So that's sort of the higher level outcome of how common triadic closure or transitivity is. There is a psychological explanation from really the early days of network science, of social network analysis, called balance theory, and this says that that people like to have their networks in balance. That if they're out of balance, then something will change typically for it to be out of balance. And so, if this represents liking, that if A likes B and B likes C, but C hates A, so the red is like an enemy relationship, then this network is out of balance. Then something should change or will change in order for there to be balance again. And that could be, for example, there's lots of ways that this could happen. That now A hates B, right? Because C hates A. Yeah, so B and C become friends and they both become enemies with A, right? So you can have two negative and one positive is in balance. Because two hate each other and the other two like each other. Or you can have all positive, right? That A and B are good friends and B and C are good friends, and together they work it out and they spend time together or whatever, and A and C become friends. Another is the complete dissolution of the network, that C and A hate each other so much that the friendships between A and B and C can't be maintained, right? So, but there's this idea, right, that there has to be, it goes along with ideas of like cognitive dissonance, that when we can't, when the people who are around us, the people that we care about, hate each other, something has to give. I mean, it's pretty kind of straightforward idea. There's also, there's another version of this. It really kind of depends on what these relationships are. So if this is friendship and dislike, then that's a good way of understanding what we would expect to happen, or what balance theory would expect to happen. But what if this is love? A is in love with B, and B is in love with C, then C may be indifferent to A, but A probably hates C, right? So it really depends on what these relationships are. So in that sense, in that case, this would be balanced, right? If this is in love and in love, then we would expect sort of going the other direction, a negative relationship. So positive and a negative relationship there. Let me check. I had one more note that I thought I wanted to make about this, and I couldn't get my notes to come up. Hold on just one second. Okay. Yeah, and similarly, if this is hatred, if A hates B and B hates C, well, in fact, then maybe A would like C and C would like A. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. That sort of idea. And this is, depending on what these are, or what these edges represent, this is, right, a classic like love triangle. It's the source of drama and literature and movies, is kind of these relationships and how they're going to be balanced. So that's balance theory, or a kind of a rough layman's guide to balance theory at a high level view. So other theories about why people form edges, some are based in kind of a rational choice theory of human behavior. So one of these is social capital, which we'll talk about a lot more. The idea that people will, we talked a little bit about structural holes, this idea that there may be places in a network where people aren't connected, and by you becoming the connector between groups, you can gain power, right? And so you form relationships not for because you want that power, sort of you have an opportunity to gain power or leverage. Social exchange theory is kind of similar, but it says, it asks, instead of looking at sort of the broader network and connecting groups, it says that people look at sort of individual relationships and think, do the benefits of this relationship outweigh the costs at more of a one-to-one level? This is sort of a resource dependency model of what resources do I have, what resources do I need, and are the people in my network giving them to me? Who could I be friends with or gain relationships with in order to get the resources I need? And some of these sound very I guess utilitarian or cynical. But some of this, I think makes a lot of sense. And a lot of our relationships are really utilitarian. I think most of us are okay with like work relationships being pretty utilitarian, that becoming friends with, people who might have jobs or hire you for jobs in the future is sort of makes sense. But we might be a little bit more wary of saying that our friendships should be based in the same way, some sort of calculation about how much we can get from the other person. How often are they going to, take me out to lunch or something? Sort of rubs us the wrong way, that there are other, that it seems like it should be sort of above this. So both of especially social exchange theories assume to operate at the kind of dyad level, deciding about an individual relationship, while social capital is sort of thinking a little bit more broadly. Okay, the last thing I wanted to mention really quickly is this idea of foci, or a focus of activity. This is Scott Feld's idea, he elaborates on it in the paper that we read. I think that this is in part a a pushback against these kind of psychological explanations for why we see things like transitivity, why we see things like, you know, dense networks where there's lots of people in groups and a few ties between them. And he says that people often either choose activities or are forced into activities by, you know, where they live, for example, that they have interests and things that they want to do, and that they these sort of foci put them in communication with and proximity to other people, and that naturally they are going to gain relationships with them. And so these ties are a function of activities. You aren't choosing at each individual person whether you want to be friends with them, but you sort of gain relationships as you do things with people. And there is sort of a recursive relationship here as well, that when you spend time with people who are similar to you, you become more similar to them, but you also bring them into other foci, other activities that you do together. Excuse me. And so those relationships can get strengthened. And then the reason that we see as like groups dissolve and foci become less powerful, a few ties remain, right? And so the main groups are sort of where they're still active foci, where they were stronger, and then the few edges between them are often either, you know, he doesn't say that people never meet randomly. They're either people meeting randomly, or they're sort of the remnants of groups that have dissolved from the past. So it's sort of a group theory of how individual relationships form. And I think overall, I think it's complementary. You know, you can believe that both kinds of things are going on at the same time. But he sort of shows that a lot of the things that we think of, you know, like triadic closure as being, I'm friends with, you know, A is friends with C because, you know, B introduced them to C, because something about this relationship between A and B, or B and B and C is what led to the relationship between A and C. But he says, you know, it's really probably just because they all are in the same sorority. It's nothing about A and B or B and C led to the friendship. It's just because they're already doing the same things anyway. So that's the idea. Those are just a few things I wanted to kind of get out there, and kind of supplement the readings, sort of a few additional things. So see you soon. Thanks.